You know what's fascinating? Artificial intelligence is completely transforming how engineers code, and MATLAB's new Copilot feature is processing over 10 million lines of code per day to help developers work faster.
Those numbers are incredible. How is this actually changing the way people approach their engineering problems?
Well, let me paint you a picture. Imagine having a brilliant MATLAB expert sitting next to you, available 24/7, who can not only write code, but explain complex concepts in simple terms. That's what Copilot is doing for thousands of engineers right now.
Hmm. But doesn't that raise concerns about engineers becoming too dependent on AI assistants?
That's exactly what makes this so interesting. Studies show that engineers using AI coding assistants actually spend 40% more time on complex problem solving rather than getting stuck on syntax and debugging.
So, what makes MATLAB's version different from other coding assistants I've heard about?
Here's the key distinction. Copilot is trained specifically on MATLAB's vast library of functions and documentation, which means it understands things like matrix operations and signal processing in ways that generic AI tools simply can't match.
Could you walk us through a real world example of how this works?
Let's say you're working on a signal processing project and type create a bandpass filter between 10 and 50 hertz. Within milliseconds, Copilot generates not just the basic filter code, but also includes proper sampling rates, visualization, and even error checking.
That's fascinating. What about more complex engineering tasks?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. I recently saw a team use it to implement a Kalman filter for spacecraft tracking. What used to take days of coding and debugging was reduced to hours, with Copilot suggesting optimizations they hadn't even considered.
You know what I'm wondering about? How does this impact learning for engineering students?
The data here is surprising. Universities implementing Copilot in their MATLAB courses report a 35% improvement in student understanding of core concepts because they're spending less time fighting with syntax and more time grasping fundamental principles.
That makes sense, but what about the debugging aspect? That's always been one of the biggest time sinks in MATLAB.
Oh man, this is where it really shines. Copilot can analyze error messages and suggest fixes. But more importantly, it explains why the error occurred. Internal studies show this feature alone saves engineers an average of 6 hours per week in debugging time.
These efficiency gains sound almost too good to be true. There must be some limitations.
You're right to be skeptical. Copilot isn't perfect. It sometimes assumes you have toolboxes you don't own, and about 15% of its initial code suggestions need some modification. But here's the interesting part. Even those mistakes often lead to learning opportunities.
How are experienced MATLAB users adapting to this new tool?
The adoption rate tells an interesting story. 78% of professional MATLAB users who try Copilot continue using it daily after the first month. They're finding it especially valuable for code optimization and documentation.
Speaking of optimization, how does it handle performance critical code?
Recent benchmarks show that Copilot suggested optimizations improve code execution speed by an average of 23%. It's particularly good at identifying opportunities for vectorization and parallel processing.
That's impressive. What about the future implications for the engineering field?
Well, looking at current trends, we're seeing a shift where engineers are spending about 60% less time on basic coding tasks and more time on innovation. Industry analysts predict this could lead to a 40% increase in engineering productivity by 2025.
Those productivity gains could really transform how engineering projects are approached.
Exactly right. And here's what's really exciting. Companies using MATLAB Copilot are reporting they can take on more complex projects with the same team size, leading to a 45% increase in project complexity without adding headcount.
So, what's your key takeaway for engineers considering this tool?
The data really speaks for itself. Engineers using Copilot are completing projects 30% faster while producing more reliable code. But perhaps more importantly, they're solving problems they wouldn't have attempted before because the technical barriers are lower.
That really changes the game for what's possible in engineering.
And that's exactly why this matters. We're not just talking about coding faster, we're talking about expanding what engineers can achieve. The real revolution isn't in the code itself, but in the problems we can now solve.